Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Hormone Helper podcast. I'm Coach Andrew, your hormone helper from Fit for All Fitness. I personally coach over 1,600 men and women to help better understand their hormones so they can lose weight and get their metabolism back on track. With this podcast, you're going to hear from me and my special guests about everything from metabolism to thyroid to weight loss. And we even talk a little bit of sexy time as we chat to spread more knowledge thick like butter on your hormones. If you're ready to learn, I'm ready to share, so let's do this. All right, Fit Fam, here we go. Today we are going to be talking about symptoms of out of control hormones. I'm so excited to talk about this because I feel like I'm having conversations about symptoms daily. It doesn't even have to be with clients, it's with family members, it's with friends. Literally everybody I speak to probably within 15 minutes is like, I am having an issue with this. And disclaimer before I start talking about symptoms of out of control hormones, we did the first podcast episode on the difference between an indicator and what a symptom is, because there are differences. So I'll go over it very quickly here. Essentially, an indicator is kind of an early warning sign that essentially your body is having these issues, and a symptom is the manifestation of that warning sign being ignored. So if you want to learn about the differences so you can understand whether you have an indicator or symptom, go check out episode 1. But this is going to be solely about the symptoms and where these symptoms can come from. There are so many places in the body that make hormones. There's a ton of them. And there are so many places that can go wrong. So how do you really know what symptom is coming from what? If you were to, go speak to a doctor, or you take a look at the, good old Ask WebMD. I like to make fun of that place, but truly, I'm sure there is some really true research behind there. But you're going to see that there are a lot of symptoms that tend to overlap, and there's a lot of different conditions as to why that overlaps. So before I go into symptoms, I kind of want to explain to you the relationship between the hormones. So I'll simplify it a little bit. There's a ton of different hormones, but we're going to focus on kind of the main 4 that you can control from a natural perspective and that cause 95% of the issues. So we're going to talk about estrogen, which is basically fat usage. We're going to talk about testosterone for the purpose of repair. We'll talk about cortisol for our energy high or our energy low. And then we're going to talk about our thyroid. So those are kind of the main 4. And all of these symptoms, or the result of the indicators that start to happen, can really differ depending on which one is high and low, which one is stealing from the other, or which one is non-existent whatsoever. So let me explain the relationship a little bit. I want you to picture kind of a box, a square in your head. Top left-hand corner, let's throw estrogen in there. And estrogen is responsible for fat usage. So when estrogen is high, your fat is high. And when estrogen is low, your fat storage and your fat usage is low. So essentially, estrogen is kind of the corner pillar because fat just reads from the body as energy. So when we're looking at fat around us, it's not something, I know something sometimes visually you might be uncomfortable, but the body doesn't see that. It just says, hey, I have energy on my body. On the bottom left-hand corner, you're going to put cortisol, and that is your energy high or your energy low. So cortisol is responsible for managing how much energy you start with during the day, and then it's going to cycle all the way down to at night when you start to go to sleep. Estrogen and cortisol work exclusively with each other. So if cortisol is ever so low that it needs energy, it asks that of estrogen, and that's where estrogen will give you some fat. So estrogen and cortisol tend to talk to each other, and they are probably 85% of the issues that I see that people have. So I'll give you a personal example. So after going through my treatments, I had adrenal fatigue, and my cortisol was like as dead low as possible. For those of you who have had adrenal fatigue before, I'm sure you're familiar with, thin brittle nails, the chronic level of fatigue, the inability to tolerate stress. I was a bundle of nerves, and it wasn't a good bundle of nerves. There was no excitement about it. It was just, I was really tired. And alongside the fact that my cortisol was really low, that was also the highest amount of body fat that I ever had on me because of the amount of chronic stress. So my cortisol wasn't making enough. It was asking my body, hey, like we need to give more energy to Andrew. So the body goes, not a problem. Every time Andrew eats, I'm just going to save some a little bit more so we can keep giving that cycle. So on the left hand side, those are kind of the main two, and they talk to each other for fat usage and for energy usage. On the top right hand corner, let's throw testosterone there. So testosterone is more for the purposes of repair. It's got other functions, but we'll keep it simple just to make it easier to line up the symptoms. From a testosterone based perspective, you can either have high testosterone, which means you have high muscle tissue, you have high muscle development, you have high repair function, or it can be low, which means that repair function is slow, which means your muscular growth is slow. On the bottom right hand corner of this invisible box we're going to put our thyroid. So our thyroid has a lot of hormones. We have TSH, LH, FSH. Those all stand for different hormones. I'm sure you've heard of those, or you might have seen them on blood work from your doctor before. TSH is your thyroid stimulating hormone. LH is your luteinizing hormone, and FSH is your follicular stimulating hormone. Think of your thyroid being responsible for temperature. So the idea is if your thyroid runs fast, it runs hot, which means you burn more energy. And if your thyroid runs slow, it runs cold. It's your thyroid's responsibility to manage and help those other three systems, to help testosterone, to help estrogen, and to help cortisol. For the most part, your cortisol and estrogen kind of deal with the energy level, and they're responsible for anything energy. And testosterone's there to repair what gets damaged through the day. Now, where a symptom can come into play is if one of these things is either too high or too low, or if one of these things is stealing from another hormone. So the thyroid is there to help out. If we have someone who's chronically high, or yes, if we have someone who's chronically high, oh man, can you tell that I've been talking a lot today? If we have someone who has chronically high cortisol, there we go, and they're super stressed all the time. I love that. That's hilarious. And they're super stressed all the time. Then essentially, the thyroid goes, you know what? I'm going to give a little bit of the hormones that I have to try and help you out a little bit. So I'm going to give you some of my raw hormones, and cortisol, that will allow you to make some more hormones for you. So this is what we call essentially hormone theft, where a hormone is taking from another one in order to be able to function. Or you have a hormone low. And a hormone low can be from anything, really. It can be from you being depleted. It could be from suppression. So, like, let's say suppression, birth control. There we go. So, let's say someone's taken birth control, and they've taken birth control their whole life, and birth control is designed to suppress estrogen. So that means your estrogen is always rating as low. Well, if it's always low, then your body's going to say, I need to make more cortisol to kind of help that level of energy. And cortisol says, I don't have enough to make, so I got to steal some from the thyroid. And it's the function of either stealing or being in a high or low place that causes a symptom to occur. This is where that initial red flag happens that then builds into a symptom. So if you understand this box, essentially hormones are pretty basic. If it can function on its own, it will. If it can't, it's going to steal from something else. Now, why did I put kind of estrogen in that top left box and testosterone in the far right? That's what we'll call it. Political jokes now. No, we are not going to talk politics at all here. I have zero interest. I'm not educated in that. But essentially, estrogen and testosterone are a high and low of each other. They fight for the same amount of 100%. So when one is dominant, the other one is low. And when the other one is dominant, the other one is low. So if you have, for example, a male naturally has higher levels of testosterone, meaning their estrogen level is going to be significantly lower. And it is the vice versa for females. Females typically have higher levels of estrogen, and their testosterone is significantly lower. That allows for certain male functions and for certain female functions to be able to progress through. So it either comes from a hormone being excessively high, excessively low, or for a hormone that is being stolen from another. If we don't address that indicator that the body gives, it becomes a symptom. And the symptom that we feel can manifest itself in a lot of stuff. I want to start with cortisol because cortisol is probably the easiest thing to determine, and it's normally the first type of symptoms that you get. So, for cortisol, people who are high stress, people who have high functioning level jobs, a lot of our corporate level execs, or like that we train, or even like moms that have multiple kids, tend to have high levels of cortisol, and they see weight gain. So especially around the abdomen and the stomach, that's pretty common. They've got puffy, flushed faces, so like natural, like bright red skin underneath. That's a symptom of your hormones are off. That's not just you've got rosy cheeks, right? So there you go. You can get rosy cheeks for free if you just throw your hormones off. But a puffy, flushed face, you have mood swings. So having excessively happy moods, excessively depressed moods, increased levels of anxiety. Anxiety is so hormonal. And it's crazy because I experienced this last year as we were transitioning through COVID. So, me and my wife, we won three businesses. And besides running the three businesses, we were trying to close on a brand new house. And then we had booked our wedding and we were getting married and the home was closing and there were problems everywhere and fires that I had to put up. And I remember going to my wife saying, I'm going into these client calls and I'm literally stumbling over my words. I can't speak. I'm having so many issues. And I thought that I had developed a stutter or like a condition because the stutter was very heavy. It was very bad. And first thing that I did was like, okay, well, I understand that my stress level is absolutely high. So I went to a naturopath friend and I got myself a Dutch test, DUTCH. And it's a saliva test or a urine test, depending which one you get, that allows you to check where your hormones are at. So the moment I checked it, I was like, holy crap, my cortisol level is through the absolute roof. It was 3 times the normal value that it should be for me. So I was like, all right, I need to start reducing the stressors. And immediately I started taking the steps and altering my diet with some zinc based foods to reduce that down. Lo and behold, my anxiety went away. Anxiety is more of a hormonal response, and people don't realize that. The same thing with heavy amounts of depression. There's a reason why in men, sometimes having high amounts of depression can be from excessively low levels of testosterone because the poor muscle recovery and the poor creation of hormones leads you to have poor mental health. And that has been tied to it as well. But we're on cortisol right now. So the weight gain, puffy and flushed face, mood swings, increased anxiety, higher susceptibility to infections. So, cortisol is responsible for managing your energy. So, it makes sense if your cortisol is excessively high and you're working overtime to try and get energy, you're probably at a state of being burnt out and it makes you susceptible to infections. High blood pressure. So, as you get higher energy, your heart pumps faster, giving you an increased amount of blood pressure. Acne and changes in the skin. This is a big one. Your skin being the biggest organ in the body, it is one of the easiest things that gets shorted. So if we're ever short hormones or we're ever short nutrients, you bet your butt you're going to start developing some type of a skin condition. Might be a rash, might be acne, but you're going to see changes on your skin as a result of that. And high cortisol levels can ultimately lead to higher risk for bone fractures and osteoporosis. So essentially, having high cortisol is like taking your energy and cranking it up to 200, but not really filling the gas tank from the other side. So you get to a point where you become very depleted and these issues start to progress and start to become worse. So high cortisol levels are typically experienced with people who have heavy physical jobs. So think construction worker or someone who's working heavily with their body more than 8 hours a day, with high functioning people. So I see it a lot of in the corporate execs that we work with, a lot of the small business owners that we work with, or again, moms being able to, try to keep their household together. And this day and age, which a huge kudos to you moms. I'm hoping one day I have the joy of being able to have a son and a daughter. We want two kids, me and Lorna. But I do not know how someone like us working for ourselves, I have the ability to be flexible. I do not know how someone raises a child in this day and age, working a job and then doing children. It's a lot. So it can be normal for these high cortisol levels to come up. And then it gets to a point where it's like, well, what do I do? Now, just like there can be high cortisol levels, there gets to a point where you can develop low cortisol levels. So think about it. If you keep tapping out the tank all the time, it's going to get to a place where it goes down. And when it goes down, this is where you get low cortisol or you get what's called adrenal fatigue. So low cortisol levels exhibit in your body running cold and your body running slow. So if you thought weight gain was an issue with high cortisol, the inability to lose weight and to keep weight off is going to be an issue with low cortisol. So having fever-like symptoms, so always feeling like you're on the verge of a migraine, or always feeling like you're so tired it's hard for you to lift your arms, and temperature sensitivity. So you cannot tolerate cold whatsoever. Me personally, now that my hormones have been balanced for ages now, well, I say ages, but I mean I took care of the cortisol thing last year. Essentially, my body runs like a furnace. I have heat that comes off my body, and my wife Lorna is so funny. She like wants to hug me in bed, but at the same time, she's like, "You're so on fire. I just can't. Like my heat just radiates off my body." But that's a good thing. That means that you have a healthy metabolism, you have a healthy hormone panel, and you're burning energy. So if you've got cold hands and feet and you're starting to get cold joints and you can't tolerate temperature changes, you might have low cortisol level issue. That might be a thing. So those are the symptoms that come from cortisol exclusively. I'm going to go through each one of these because if you're having multiple symptoms, I'll tell you where some of these can cross over. Next one is going to be testosterone. So you've got symptoms of high testosterone and symptoms of low testosterone. Testosterone is responsible mainly for repair. So where people say like having high levels of test is going to make you some like monster human being where you just become a block brick wall, unable to lift your arms. No, there's other things that are involved in having your body build muscle mass. Like someone could have high levels of testosterone, not exercise, and not have any muscle mass, right? But ultimately, high levels of testosterone kind of manifest themselves differently in male and female. So, from a male's perspective, body hair is huge. Excess levels of body hair indicate extremely high levels of testosterone. So, think back of the shoulders, center of back, back of the legs around the hamstrings, the low back, the glute area. You're going to get excessive levels of growth because the high levels of testosterone give off what's called androgens. So they stimulate cellular and follicle growth because they're repairing so much. So excess body hair is huge. Increased sex drive, sure, absolutely. Early puberty, of course. But high levels of testosterone also gives you prone to excessive amounts of mood swings. So if you are someone that has too high, you can kind of 180 pretty quick with your attitude, and that's not good. So people who are incredibly aggressive, they tend to have higher amounts of testosterone than people who, kind of go with the flow like me and just chillax and live on a lower frequency level than blowing my top every 15 seconds. But for men, that's high levels. For females, essentially the deepening of the voice, that's huge. Excess facial hair. So right underneath the jawline is where a lot of your nodules and of course your thyroid set. So it makes sense that when you have higher amounts of testosterone, you're changing the hormonal area around your face, and that can develop into excess facial hair and the irregular periods. So estrogen is responsible, and this is why women have higher estrogen. It's responsible for regulating your ovulation cycle and for regulating your period cycle. So if you have incredibly high levels of testosterone, That means you have low levels of estrogen, which means that your period is irregular as hell. And it might be spotty. It might be really tough for you to keep track of when it's coming. You might bleed for 2 days, not bleed, and then bleed for another 2 days. It's really, really different. Typically, people do not experience high issues of testosterone. Testosterone highs normally come from either like genetic factors where someone just naturally has a higher level, but it won't be anything alarming. Or it would be something that either someone is taking like exogenously, which means they're putting it into themselves, or they're having an estrogen issue, which makes their testosterone dominant. The symptoms of low testosterone are mainly the concern. So for men, low muscle mass, this is huge. So osteoporosis, osteoarthritis, having joint symptoms, having muscles that always feel like they're so weak and you can't recover them. They're always chronically sore. That may be an indicator of low testosterone. Low sex drive and a low sperm count. Those are big things as well too, and erectile dysfunction. People, especially men, will downplay these issues until they get so bad that they become dysfunctional. You shouldn't do that. It's not normal. Like, you should have a healthy sex drive. You should have, you should be getting daily erections, hopefully more than daily, multiple times a day erections. And you want to have good muscle tissue that's developing regularly. Otherwise, you're going to start to have arthritic symptoms. So that is a symptom of low testosterone in men. And in women, you're talking about weakened bones. So the osteoarthritis covers across the board because there's no recovery. You're going to have fertility problems. So your ability to hold an egg through a term pregnancy will be different, and vaginal dryness. So your external vaginal health is largely um, reliant on the recovery piece. So this is going to be the repair that of those the membranes and the creation of mucose. And if you have low testosterone, you don't make as much as you do. So that is the low testosterone and the high testosterone symptoms that you can experience. Of the two, 9 times out of 10 people experience low testosterone levels. They don't experience high. A fun fact for you guys, compared to the our ancestors, so like our grandfathers and grandmothers, we actually have a 30% reduction on average of testosterone. Um, we don't fight things. We don't use our body like it used to. So the body just doesn't make the hormones that way anymore. And that is totally fine. That's just the way that we live now, and that we function. Our next symptoms is estrogen. I'm going to spend a lot of time on estrogen because this is the main issue that the women who come to us struggle with a lot. They can't seem to understand how their estrogen, or what I call stresstrogen, really affects their weight, their metabolism, their thyroid function, their period cycle, it functions everything. You can have a low of estrogen, you can have a high of estrogen. Both are bad. Like, unlike testosterone, where having a little high might be good, having too high of estrogen means that you are going to struggle perpetually with your weight forever. And having incredibly low estrogen means that you're not going to be able to have any fertility or have any issues. So I'm going to go through the list of the estrogen symptoms as a whole, and then essentially I'll walk through, which one is low, which one is high. So fatigue. So if you have incredibly low estrogen and your cycle is not moving as fast as it should, you're going to get fatigue. Memory loss, hot flashes, and osteoporosis all come from high levels of estrogen. So when they become so high, the body then forces testosterone to be low. Those become the issues. Okay. No libido and infertility, those come from having really, really low estrogen. So if your estrogen is incredibly low, you won't have a sex drive. Your cycles will be really weird. You might have things like fibroids or PMS or endometriosis. All of those things come from the infertility piece and from the estrogen. Now, if we take their estrogen, we crank it up, we go excessive high, then this is where we start to develop fat based issues from estrogen. So hip fat, weight gain, cellulite, swollen breasts, breast lumps, fibroids, those are normally caused from higher levels of estrogen, because fat is just a cell that's grown larger. That's all it is. So it's like a cell that just keeps getting pumped up, pumped up, pumped up until it becomes so big that you see it. So there's a lot more symptoms from an estrogen base than there is from any of those other ones that we've spoken about so far: the cortisol, the testosterone, and the estrogen. And that's because estrogen is connected to everything. If estrogen is your fat usage and your fat storage, any system that is connected to energy is affected by estrogen. Your stomach, that is digesting your food, so then that way you can be able to have enough nutrients for hormones, affected by estrogen. Your cortisol, which is basically the glands on top of your kidneys, your adrenal glands that make the cortisol, that is also affected by estrogen. Your thyroid, if your thyroid is running slow, which requires you to store more fat, also affected by estrogen. So estrogen tends to be the main culprit that generates the majority of the symptoms that we see now. And in the order, well, somebody just dropped something, and hopefully no one passed away downstairs. Hopefully I don't go downstairs and find someone passed away. But I don't know if you heard that knock, was crazy. So essentially, from an estrogen perspective, estrogen is the top number one issue that 99% of the people have. If you have a hormonal issue, chances are you're having an issue with estrogen. Either it's incredibly high or it's really, really low. Following second for the symptoms is cortisol. So, cortisol managing energy. If your estrogen is having symptoms, you're going to have 1 to 2 symptoms from the cortisol base. And your testosterone is really going to be a reaction to your level of estrogen. So that's how this works. It's an estrogen cortisol conversation for symptoms, and testosterone tags around to see whether it's dominant or it's not. Now, the last one is your thyroid. So your thyroid runs like a thermostat. I like to use that as an example. So if it runs slow, it runs cold. And if it runs hot, it runs fast. So it makes sense that all of the symptoms that come in line with high or low thyroid come in line with fast or with slow for anything for your body. So if your thyroid is low and slow, you're going to have weight gain. If your thyroid is low, you're going to have lack of cellular repair, because anything, your digestion, it's going to slow down. Your recovery, it's going to slow down. Your muscle repair, it's going to slow down. Your growth, it's going to slow down. So the symptom from a thyroid perspective becomes more about what hormone is stealing from it, and not whether or not you actually have a symptom from thyroid whatsoever. But we'll go through the symptoms anyway. So we talked about the thyroid low. Now, the thyroid high. The thyroid high is essentially if your metabolism is running too fast. So maybe someone is incredibly underweight. Maybe they cannot build muscle whatsoever because the body just continues to eat it. Maybe the moment they like having too frequent bowel movements, where it's like you have to go to the washroom every like half an hour. That means that your metabolism is running too quickly. A lot of the symptoms you will find from thyroid are external. They have to do with your digestion, they have to do with your metabolism speed, and they have to do with how fast or how slow you run. A lot of the estrogen symptoms you'll find are based around fat storage and fat usage. And the cortisol ones are based around stress, which is energy usage. If your stress is high, you're going to have high issues. If your stress is low, you're going to have low issues. And then testosterone is more the tag along that is just fighting between estrogen and not. So those are the symptoms. And listen, there is a difference between men and women when it comes to looking at symptoms. You always need to look at, and if you haven't listened to the podcast number one first, listen to the difference between an indicator and a symptom. You need to find what the indicator is first before you start addressing the symptoms. everybody wants their symptoms to go away. Hell yeah. Like after my treatment, it was a freaking nightmare for me to be able to get back to work when I could barely keep my eyes open, when I was overweight, and it was not, well, overweight in terms of my standard, right? Like I went from being 185 to being 130, but I had no muscle. And going through that, I know how frustrating it can be to be like, just get rid of my fatigue, just get rid of my weight, just get rid of my painful periods. But for all of those things, there is an indicator that caused that. And that indicator is what will allow you to determine whether or not it's cortisol, it's estrogen, it's thyroid, or it's testosterone. So here's the difference between men and women. Women's hormones cycle every 28 to 32 days. Okay, we'll call this the hormone factor. I like this. Ooh, the hormone factor. Nice. So women's, they cycle every 28 to 32 days. Women also go through menopause, where the start of menopause, estrogen incredibly skyrockets. Through menopause, estrogen stays high. And then after menopause, estrogen becomes virtually non existent. That is essentially where someone's ovulation cycle is quote unquote done, where technically you're not making enough to be able um, to have kids. So by keeping that in mind, the majority of women have estrogen issues and cortisol based issues because now life is 24/7. I know it's chronically stressed. I spend my life being stressed too. And that is what women tend to suffer with for the most part. They suffer with issues around menopause, they suffer with issues around estrogen. And then it also doesn't help that doctors are prescribing birth control like candy now. Want a tic tac? Take a birth control. It's like, please, why you do this? Like there's better ways. For those of you who are on this call, I'm not a medical practitioner, but heavily consider that you I heavily recommend that you consider having a conversation about your doctor about the birth control that you're on. That's it. I'll leave it at that. We'll do a separate podcast on birth control. We'll do a separate podcast on birth control and monster pause. That's what I like to call menopause because that's what all the ladies seem to laugh. But that is the hormone factor for women. So more estrogen, they cycle their hormones every 28 to 32 days. They have a menopause period where estrogen goes excessively high, it holds, and then excessively low. For men, this hormone factor is totally different. For men, we start with the highest amount of hormones, and our hormones peak at 20 to 22. From age 22 onwards, our hormones are on a steady decline until they become virtually non existent. So it's year over year, we lose 0.5% to 1% of our hormone profile, and our testosterone declines. It continues to decline, decline, decline. So, where men have issues with is men have cortisol issues and they have thyroid issues. So, they deal with high levels of stressors, which means that they have cortisol based symptoms, and they have issues from a thyroid perspective. Normally, it's because of diet or because of certain things that maybe they're lacking from their diet. Very rarely do men have estrogen issues. That's why, for the most part, men lose weight a lot faster and they don't have issues with a lot of weight gain because it comes off very quickly because the testosterone is high. But it's so important for men as they get older because as you start getting older, 40s, 50s, 60s, you've lost 60 to 70% of your testosterone at that point. So what ends up happening is men don't take care of themselves throughout life because they're like, I got to get this high level job, I got to work a buck at 10 hours, got to put my kid through uni, like university, my God, so expensive. But it's like by the time all of that happens, they hit an age of 40 to 45, where then they start trying to do strength training to take care of themselves, and they don't see the same results that they would have saw if they had started at 22 to 25. Statistically speaking, men who train from the age of 18 forward have 34 to 36%. There's kind of a range. Increased levels of receptors for testosterone, for growth hormone, and for thyroid, all because they've trained their body and they exercise more. Exercise is beneficial really for everybody, but that's really, really important. So for men, they start with the highest amount and then that starts to go down. And that's why it's called. So for them, it's not called menopause, it's called andropause, where their hormones slowly die away and then it doesn't work, right? Actually, you know what? Let me see if I can pull up. There's got to be, I was literally looking at this the other day, the average hormone production ages by percentage. Where is it? Oh, nice. Okay. Um, Sex hormone production in men and women. So this is from Harvard. From Harvard. So we've got the average hormone production and then the age. So essentially, the average age where menopause tends to fluctuate between is 38 and 54. So that is kind of the menopause window. And the highest peak of estrogen is from 38 to 42. So you have like a 2 year window which menopause is incredibly active, and then the slow decline of estrogen until when you pass 60 or greater normally, which is kind of what the average is, someone's estrogen level is less than 40% of what it was for females. And for men, so essentially, like I said, that 20 years of age is that high peak in testosterone. And then by the time they hit the same age of 60, they're looking at about 54 to 52% of their testosterone left. And then at 80, it becomes 22%. So there's significant drops, providing you don't exercise, you don't eat right for your body type, you're not doing anything to balance your hormones. All of these significantly change. So now that we know about symptoms, what are we going to be looking at? Because I just went through a bucket ton of symptoms, and you're probably like, I have 15 of these. To determine whether or not you've got a symptom in a specific area, you need two or more symptoms. So if you just have one symptom from each, you can you can have increased weight gain just by eating the wrong things, right? So you can't be like, "Oh, I'm blaming my weight gain on hormones," right? So what you want to do is, of all of these, you might have to listen to this a few times. Look at the high cortisol symptoms. Do I suffer from 3 of these? Or do I suffer from 3 or more of these? Same thing with the testosterone, same thing with the estrogen and with the thyroid. So as you do that, it's going to point in a direction of a hormone that's focused. And then with that, you're going to be able to individually work on each specific symptom to make sure that it is progressing better. And you can see this progression daily. I always recommend that people keep a log of how they wake up with energy. So, did you wake up feeling tired? Did you wake up feeling wired? Did you wake up feeling anxious? Because that gives you a good indicator of what level of energy you start with. And then through the day, write down when you're having your lowest point of energy, when you're experiencing your highest amount of symptoms, when something is progressively worse, and ultimately what your energy level is like when you go to bed. If you combine the symptoms with the level of what is there, you're going to be able to easily determine, okay, is it estrogen? Is it cortisol? Is it this? Or you can do what our clients do and essentially say, listen, I need some support. We have coaches that are here to help you all the time. I'm here as the hormone helper to make sure that you get that support you need. And essentially, we'll go through. We'll have you do a Dutch test. We'll walk you through what the results are to make sure that you can see that consistency, and you see basically how your hormones are creating and how they're being made. And then we can put together a protocol for you so you can understand how to eat right for your body type and how to balance those hormones with food. Because that's how we do it. We do it with food. I'm a big believer in doing stuff. I mean, really realistically, if it doesn't make sense doing something where it's heavy into supplements, like at the end of the day, like although I will openly say this, I own a supplement company and I will tell everyone it is a food first approach because food is sustainable and sustainable is maintainable. So that is all for this podcast on symptoms. And remember, you can always reach out. I'll drop an area in the show notes as well too. If you have a few symptoms, or if you're like questioning it because maybe there was a symptom you didn't hear and you're like, what about this? Cool. I'd love to have a convo with you on it. I'd love to see exactly what's going on and how we can help. So that is all for this episode. Well, it seems I'm all out of info juice for today. That's all for this episode, and thank you so much for listening. Please leave a raving review for me if you've learned something good, and make sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Now, if you're in the mood for some more great content and tools to get your hormones on track, why not check out our free Facebook group and the blog on our site. We do amazing weekly trainings in our group that me and my wife call Tea and Teachings that give good tips for anything hormones and metabolism related. It's also a great community where you get to share your goals and success with like-minded people just like you. I'll make sure to drop both the Facebook group link and the blog link in the show notes for you. Or if you're ambitious like me, the name of the group is Weight Loss and Balanced Hormones. It'll say Fit for All beside it with a picture of me. So come and join us and have more fun.